Robbie, let me start with you. You went through this period of your life writing your memoir testimony. I wonder if there was something different about having Daniel put it on film.
Well, it was the focus. You know, in testimony, I'm writing a very broad horizon of a story. You know, from when I was a little kid and up through the last waltz, as we see, and Daniel had to figure out in this film. You know, we're not making Gone with the Wind here. We've got to focus on a certain period in this time. And I was surprised and I was impressed with the idea of going to a place, and because in these rock and roll documentary things about people, oh my God, look what happened, and this happened, and all of these stories, he found a way to make this so moving and so emotional, and I didn't see that coming. And when I saw the first assemblage, rough cut, whatever you want to call it, of this, I thought, this is quite beautiful. And the fact that it was touching to me, and that he had the sense to go in a direction like that, which is night and day to what a lot of these kind of films are, that was very, very rewarding.
Just as a quick aside to that, there's a moment in the film when Robbie describes playing this record he made with the band Music from Big Pink for Bob Dylan. And Dylan, like, here's the first song. He's like, who wrote that? Whose song is that? And then Robbie's like, I wrote that. And then Bob's like, you wrote that? That's your song? And my experience of that moment was when Robbie saw the rough cut. He's like, that's your movie? That's what you made? And that was, you know, there were many art imitating life moments in this, and that was one that meant a great deal to me, because he's like, all right, you made something great, cool.
So, Daniel, can you talk about the process of excavating the archival footage? I mean, Robbie said that even in the process, you surprised him with things that you found.
Well, first and foremost, as I'm looking out into the audience, I see Elliot Landy sitting out there, who's the photographer who probably shot...
God.
Elliot, stand up.
It's my old buddy.
So set up for the audience what we're seeing of Elliot's work in there.
I mean, like, almost everything. Like, Elliot was the guy who shot the band. I mean, the iconic look of the group, sort of the old Western Matthew Brady inspiration that the group is known for, that was because of Elliot's creative vision. And he's obviously in the film as well. But for me, making the documentary is very much a question of trying to leave no stone unturned and find every single piece of archive. And so you can do, you know, a surface level dig, but then you can, like, call widows of photographers and ask to come over. And, you know, I was like a pain in Elliot Landy's ass for like a year and a half, going over to his house, you know, every 6 months, begging him to see his negatives, until very reluctantly he let me take a look through that material. But it's just having that sort of doggedness to try and find whatever it is that's out there that no one has seen before. And Elliot's photos are absolutely iconic in the annals of rock and roll history, but there's a lot of photos that I was interested in seeing that I had never seen before, that hadn't been published, and they just take the story and elevate it and bring it to life. And so I'm so grateful for Elliot's contribution, but also for you know, so many of the other photographers and estates and families that were willing to give us access to this remarkable material.
There was a thing in this world at that time with the band, in this world that we lived in, up in the mountains in Woodstock, New York, with, you know, Bob Dylan and Albert Grossman and everybody, and we didn't want anybody coming in. We didn't want anybody walking on our lawn, and we invited Elliot Landy in, and he was the only one that came in and saw what was really going on. He was part of the family. Thank you, Elliot.
Robbie, during the film, we were at a dinner at a long table, and I was at one end and you were at the other, but I caught a snatch of conversation where I heard you referring to the Chelsea Hotel that's just down the street. And because we're in New York City, even though you're a West Coast guy now and you're a Woodstock guy from the band days, I wonder if there are memories of New York City that are strong for you.
Well, there's a lot of memories that are very strong for me, but I can't tell you about them. It's just down and dirty. But you know what? I've got to share something with you tonight because we didn't know whether we could talk about this or we couldn't talk about that. But this movie is going to be distributed by Magnolia Films, one of the coolest film companies on the planet Earth, and I am honored to be part of that. And so they have announced it's going to open in New York and LA on February the 21st, and then nationwide on the 28th. And they're just the best at this. So we are in really good hands. Thank you, Eamon, for inviting us in. Thank you so much.
Daniel, I want to ask you, it's been pointed out you were a young director that Robbie entrusted. And when it came down to doing these interviews that are, probing interviews, getting into difficult parts, what was that process like for you? What was the, toughest interview that you felt you had to do, or the toughest question you felt you had to ask?
Well, that's an excellent question. When you go to an interview, especially with these very important, high-profile musical artists, I try to be mindful of the fact that these people have to do this every day, and it's kind of like motions that they go through. And so you want to try and extract something that's a little bit different. And it's about energy. And sometimes you click with an individual and you get them on a good day. When we shot the interview with Eric Clapton, for example, I had no idea that he was going to talk so candidly about addiction and substance abuse, but he did. And there were other interviews that were a little bit more challenging and a little bit more difficult. But ultimately, it was just knowing the material and knowing exactly what I wanted to extract from each interview and just having a vision and an idea of how that piece of the puzzle would fit into the broader narrative.
And Robbie, what was that process like for you? You've processed these stories, writing your own memoir, but you give a very moving account of of a lot of critical points in your life. When Daniel's sitting across from you trying to extract these stories, what was that like for you?
Well, it was interesting telling somebody from a completely different generation about something that he was really interested in, but I knew that it was so distant. It was such a departure, and that made it inspiring because I felt like I'm actually telling you something that you don't know anything about, but you're fascinated by, and I'm going to enlighten you.
The film has this focus on the band. You've had a long career since then, and one of the things that comes across in the film is the way this group of people inspired each other and made something special. And I wonder, as you've moved on to other phases of your career, it's always interesting to hear from someone who's had a career of such longevity and reinvention. What are the things that you've done along the way to kind of reinvigorate you or reignite your creative energy?
I don't know. I wake up in the morning every day thinking, okay, what's the discovery process now? And I'm just a very curious soul, so I'm always trying to uncover something and find, it's something that I didn't have before. I want to look at things from a different angle. And I've been very fortunate after this whole amazing experience with the band that, I've been, spent all these years working with Martin Scorsese and being able to make records about things that truly that I thought I can do this. I don't know anybody else that it's their job, but I can do this. I can make music about this part of my heritage, about the North American Indian, a sound. I can do this, and damn it, I think they're going to let me get away with this. So I've been able to explore, discover, and it's an ongoing process. And I'm so fortunate that after all this time, like right now, I have this new album that's just come out, Cinematic, that connects to The Irishman that I just did the score for, and I'm also the executive music producer on. And I have the 50th anniversary of the band's album. It's now, we're just put together the collector's edition of that. And I'm writing this second part, volume 2 of my memoir. It's all going on. And I should be sipping lemonade on an island somewhere, but I don't have time.
Daniel, what was it about the band that first drew you in?
Well, I grew up in Toronto, and one thing about Canadians is that we worship our own. And aside from perhaps the soul of the band, Levon Helm, that is a very Canadian group. And, I have fond memories of being in Northern Ontario on canoe trips and singing, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down as I'm meandering down some portage, very Canadian moment. And there was something about that music that the whole canon, whether it's the band or Joni or Neil or Dylan, just that generation, I was always drawn to. But the band specifically, I spoke to it a bit in my opening remarks. There was just an ethos to that music. It took me somewhere. Bruce Springsteen sums it up beautifully in the film. It sounded completely new, but like it's always been there. There's an antiquity to it. And, I was just always a huge fan. When I was in high school, I did a project where I did these giant illustrations to the lyrics of The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, and the music just always resonated. So when the book came out and I saw that maybe there was an opportunity to make this film, I just, ran for it with all the gusto and strength that I had, because I knew that I just sort of convinced myself that I had to do it. And once I convinced myself of that, it was just a question of convincing the rest of the world, which was a bigger task. But it seems to have worked out. And yeah, thank you.
Robbie, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll have time to ask a couple of questions from the audience. Martin Scorsese is the executive producer of this. You talked about working on the score for The Irishman. You've had a long history of collaborations with him. Can you talk about what it's like, that collaboration? How you begin ideas for creating musical scores for his work?
It's different every time out of the box. And the first, after we did The Last Waltz, when he was doing Raging Bull, he said, can you help me out with a couple of things here? I need something for this movie. And they were like, it was almost like chores. It was stuff that needed to be done. He said, can you do, some of the source music for it, and this Mosconi music that we're going to use, some of it doesn't sound as good as it needs to for the movie. Could you fix that up? And I had some ideas for some of the songs that were used in the movie. So we just started stirring this thing up. And then when we were done and this movie came out, Raging Bull, I thought, now that's the shit. That's something right there. I've never seen or felt a music experience in a movie quite like that before. And it drew me in to that world in a way that I didn't know. I didn't know I wanted to go there. And then the next movie he was doing, so it was like, so what are we going to do on this one? And then on and on and on. And like I said, every time we come in a different door, and it's a different way of trying to do something that isn't the obvious. It isn't, which, it's not my thing to have a big 50-piece orchestra and do traditional music for a movie. And, and to be working with somebody who keeps reminding me, whatever you're doing, it's good as long as it doesn't sound like movie music. So you think, oh, okay, so we throw out everything and start from scratch here and try again to discover something that isn't just, the formula. And every time working with Marty, to be that free from the formula is really, really inspiring. So we are already starting to work on the music for the next movie after The Irishman, which I'm really excited about, and I hope we don't get tired.
I'd have time to take a couple questions. Do we have microphones? No, we don't. Okay, so take a question right here. Yeah.
Thank you both.
I'll repeat the questions.
Thank you both. Do you want me to? I don't want to take it from you. You can use it. Yeah. Thank you. I'll give it back to you. Thank you both for coming. You've both been through this very involved, now 2.5-year long process, I think you said 2.5 years, of making the film, and I wonder what both of you take away from it. What do you both get from having now been through this experience? Both you having now met all these people and interviewed and gotten their stories, and you also retelling and in a way reliving many of the stories from your past.
Robbie, let me go first. I have a lot to say about this. So when I sort of the knowledge that I carry forward when I think about the process of making this film is really the lessons I've taken away from studying this man's life so closely. And for me, it's interesting to be a young man studying the life of someone who's a little bit older than me, but making a film about them when they were my age. And what I spent a lot of time thinking about was what it takes to have a great life and the vision and ambition that it took for Robbie Robertson to have the life that he did. And, it's the type of thing where in life you can make consequential decisions and do things that are outside your comfort zone and drop out of high school and go down and join a Southern Rockabilly band and then go on tour where you get booed every night and then go up into the mountains. And it's like, it's vision and ambition and just having this idea of what you want to achieve. And seeing your life, it taught me to sort of frame my life not in the focus of what am I going to be doing in a month or a year, but it's like, what am I going to be doing in 5 years or 10 years? And that's something that I'm very grateful for, and it just reminded me to have the courage to be bold and ambitious and have vision of my dreams and what do I want to achieve, because his dreams had no bounds, and he went out and he did the impossible. And that's something that I learned making this film that I'm eternally grateful for, that I'll always be close to my thoughts, sort of.
Ditto.
All right, woman back there, please, stand up and. So the question was about how family is such an important part of your life in the movie and keeping you solid. And she was asking about other members of the band, Richard and Rick, if they had, important women in their life that that you could shed light on.
In the brotherhood of the band, it was a family, and as we talked about that when we made music from Big Pink, there was a very trendy thing in rock and roll, like your families are evil, and you hate your father and you hate your mother and everything. And when we told Elliot that we were going to go up and take a picture with the families and everything, it was so against the grain, but never did anybody ever say or ever think, oh, you're doing this to be different. No, it was genuine. And because of that family connection, the guys in the band for a long time, they lived at my mother's house. And this family-oriented thing. So Rick was incredible with kids. He was such a special soul in that kind of way. And Richard had this gentle heart and this thing that you could feel a mile away. And Levon as much, and Garth. And so anyway, our connection together was contagious. And we all, now along this path too, there was a lot of bumps in the road, and people went this way and went that way. And, it wasn't just completely normal or defined, and never is. But anyway, at the heart of this thing was an incredible family-oriented world, and it came out in the music as well.
We're going to leave it there. The film comes out in February 23rd. You're the first audience, I think.
February 21st, excuse me.
February 21st.
In New York and LA, and the 28th, nationwide. Thank
He's a man who knows his work. I hope you get to see more films over the next days. NYC, thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to Daniel Rohr and Robbie Robertson.